Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Reason We Learn and Dissident Dispatch. Been away for a couple weeks, um, having some back issues and things, so you might notice I'm in a little different chair. For those of you who are new to this channel, please consider subscribing. It really does help. If you appreciate content about education and all the things going on with it, that is what I do here. The Dissident Dispatch show is where I react to things going on in the news, trends, and so forth in a more off the cuff way, usually on a topic, but the content is a little less evergreen than you might find in my other videos. So that's why it's a dispatch. Tonight, we are talking about school violence, specifically shootings, in view of the most recent Georgia shooting. I'm not here to talk to you about that specific shooting, although I will touch on some of the things around it, but more in terms of why these things keep happening. Why? What's going on? Before we get started, as I said, please subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel. Please like and share this broadcast so other people can join and ask questions and participate in the conversation. And you can also follow me on X at at Deb_Philman, or you can follow me on Substack, The Reason We Learn, .substack.com. I've got a couple of new things up there today, and I'm going to keep trying to add to it more frequently than I have been. So let's get down to it. I think it was a little over a week ago, I did a show with two people, Cindy O'Brien and Pamela Garfield Yeager. And we talked about why our schools are still so violent. And we talked quite a bit about the mental health component, because when these events happen, you tend to hear two competing narratives, one from the left, one from the right, typically. And the one from the left is it's the guns. It's gun culture that causes these events to occur. And if we just banned the guns, the kids would stop doing this and everybody would be safe. And then you hear from more, right-leaning quarters, it's the mental health. We have a mental health crisis on our hands. And if we just did more to help these kids with their mental health in schools, whatever, then we wouldn't have this problem. Sometimes they crisscross. So sometimes the people on the left say we need more mental health. In fact, they say it almost all the time now. We need mental health in the schools. We need counselors. We need social workers. We need more talking about emotions, talking about feelings, and so on. I'm going to make the argument this evening that that's not the case. And in fact, perhaps we need less of that sort of thing. But what I decided to do today is, first of all, bring you up to speed on the case in question, what has happened in the Georgia shooting since it occurred, and then like what else has been going on in terms of a reaction to it, and then also go into um, things you may not have heard about, because thankfully nothing has happened, but there have been quite a few. I don't want to call them like copycats, but threats, and how people are reacting to those. So let's first get into this. So the person in Georgia, Colt Gray, as you may have heard, comes from a fairly troubled home, to say the least. His mom has been charged with abusing her own mother. We already know that the father has been arrested because he got the gun for his 14-year-old son, and he's going to do jail time, no doubt. As well he should. I mean, I'm a pro-gun person all day long, but or pro Second Amendment rights anyway. And I am opposed to giving a 14-year-old child, never mind a troubled 14-year-old child, this kind of a weapon, any weapon for that matter. I think that is just grossly irresponsible. But the mom has her own issues. The grandmother apparently was on the ball about some of these things, and was one of the people who, tried to get him help, tried to do something about it, and was not. It didn't work. So if you watch the show with Pam and Cindy and me, we talked about how this kid was on the radar. It was on the radar of law enforcement. He was on the radar of the mental health professionals in the school. They even had been on the phone with his mom that morning. The mom had said, go get him, find him, and it just took too long, tragically. So we've heard this before. And we talked in that show about how time and again, these kids are on the radar for all the fear about these events, for all of the talk of the tragedy and the guns and the mental health. There really doesn't seem to be a serious effort to deal with these problems before they occur, to deal with what's going on with these kids before they happen. And it's a little bit of a mystery to all of us as to where their priorities are and why this is happening. So we and to that effect, to drive that point home, um I discovered something today looking for information about what's going on, and I found that there is actually a policy at a school where, I mean, this is mind-blowing. Check this out. This school's response to school shootings is punishing the kids who try to report a kid who's making threats. I mean, you can't make this up. So as we talked about in the show last time, um, kids will say something's going on, parents will say something's going on, even to a certain extent, the school counselor will say something's going on. And the people who would have the authority to remove the child from the class, remove the child from the school, check the backpack, call the parents, get them out of the building, do something, are reacting in the most bizarre ways. Either they're not doing anything, not taking it seriously, or they're punishing the people who report. So here's a case. It says, we've witnessed a trend over the last couple of decades of school officials letting their fear of being sued justify their punishing undeserving students. This is baffling. September 20th this year. The day after police say 14-year-old was arrested in the Georgia shooting, a radio report about that murderous attack began to play as I drove my seventh grader to school. She wanted to know if anybody had died. I said, yes, I think so, deliberately avoiding giving her the details that 2 students and 2 teachers were dead. She had just recently participated in her school's See Something, Say Something campaign and had recently had a lockdown drill. And I felt sick with the realization of how much she's been forced to think about threats at school and what she'd do if one arose. That's one of the reasons it was so upsetting to hear about what a Catholic school in Virginia Beach did when an 11-year-old sixth grader told officials there that a classmate had brought a bullet to school. He should have been effusively thanked for reporting what he saw, but in a move that epitomizes the trend in American schools of making innocent actors outlaws, I mean, this is insane. The principal, who reportedly commended the boy, at the same time punished him with a suspension. His waiting 2 hours for the opportunity to make the report anonymously, they said, was unacceptable and warranted punishment. So these kids are already dealing with the stress of, oh my God, a kid brought a bullet to school. I'm not really sure what to do. I don't want to get, retribution. We know that when these kids go in and do these violent acts, they specifically target certain children and teachers. So think how scared these kids are if they know that there's a potentially violent child and they want to turn them in, but they don't want to do it in such a way to draw attention to themselves. This is common sense. This is also an 11-year-old. This is an 11-year-old child who shouldn't have to be dealing with any of this. And if the school was paying attention to things more closely, maybe he wouldn't have to. So to punish him with a suspension is beyond the pale. Simply for waiting. It filled me with rage to think that our daughter or anybody's child would be made to feel bad in such a situation. So you think that kid's ever going to turn anyone in again or ever say anything? I mean, it's absolutely insane. Worse still, the boy who reported that his classmate had brought a bullet to school was given the same punishment. What's the message there? A 1.5-day suspension as the boy who brought the contraband. To punish the boy who alerted school officials to a possible danger is by itself indefensible, but to give the other boy the same punishment renders their actions equivalent. It beggars belief that officials at St. John the Apostle Catholic School are acting as if they are. So this is a private school. You might think, well, maybe the private schools handle it better. No, apparently they don't. So the other school in Georgia, that was a public school. They handled it very poorly, in my opinion, by just, like I said, the kid was on the radar of both the FBI and the local police. He came from a troubled home. Everybody knew things were not going well for this child. And even though the counselor had said the kid had talked about school shooting, why was he even still in the building? Why was he not sequestered? Why was he not getting help? Why do you send that kid back to class without checking his backpack? So we know now from the timeline and the details of the Georgia case that they just dropped the ball across the board. And it's not the first time. Cindy told everybody in the audience in that show last week, or I think it was a week and a half ago, that she'd been in situations where she got in trouble for trying to bring threats to the attention of the administration. I can only surmise that administrators are so much more afraid of drawing negative attention on their schools or some kind of a lawsuit or having the press or being blamed for having high violent statistics at their school or whatever than they are of people getting hurt. It is beyond comprehension that they keep doing this. These are preventable instances. Okay. So that I found that and I was like, whoa, right? Now contrast that with what is going on down in I think it was okay, then here we have in Missouri, here we have an armed Missouri teen arrested after a threat. So this one was armed with a handgun. So much for assault weapons outside of the school, and he made threats targeting a different campus, and they found him and arrested him. So there's that. There's a report here. They found the kid. Thank God nothing happened. But there's another one. So it is still happening. Then there's you probably have heard about this sheriff. This is his response. He's tired of hoaxes. So on the one hand, you have the administrators and people are going, no, we're not going to pay attention to this, blah, blah, blah. And then you have kids who are calling in threats. Now, a lot of these are not shooting threats. They're threats of bombings. Okay. And the kids have learned probably from the internet that if I do this, if I call and say there's a bomb or whatever, they'll shut down the school. They'll send everybody home. There was one right up the street from me this past week, also turned out to be a hoax. The kids are figuring out I can get out of school. So this Florida sheriff has decided he's had enough. It's costing his county so much money to do everything that they're doing that now when they figure out who it is, they are perp walking these kids. They're arresting them, handcuffing 11-year-old kids, 12-year-old kids. They're bringing them in. I can't say I disagree with this. I'm sorry, I can't. Now, I still think there's an underlying problem, which we're going to get into in terms of what's going on in these schools that kids are having the inclination either to act out in this way, which is still not benign. In addition to costing the district money, it creates this climate of fear and stress and threat, and it causes people to be desensitized to where there really is a real threat. They might think it's a hoax. What are they going to do the day it's real? They don't know. Should we show up and check for a bomb or not? Should we show up and check for a threat or not? So this is like the boy who cried wolf. So it's very dangerous. And I think they should take it very seriously. But why are they doing it? Why would kids want to get out of school so badly that they would do something that's, and where are their morals? Where are their values such that they think this is just another game to play? So, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And the last little thing I want to bring you up to speed on when it comes to this topic in general is something that I saw that, to be perfectly honest with you, horrifies me. I don't know why this is a thing, but it is a thing. And it is parents of a Parkland, Florida shooting victim, have created a video game to simulate a school shooting for political purposes. Let's go through this because this makes me feel literally sick to my stomach. Parkland, Florida, parents of Parkland victim Joaquin Oliver, who was tragically killed in the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting on Valentine's Day 2016, have launched a new video game titled The Final Exam, which challenges gamers to survive a school shooting. What? After losing their son, Manuel and Patricia Oliver created the game to educate players in the harsh realities of mass shootings and empower them to drive real change against gun violence. Real change according to them. So they've decided they know why all these kids are acting. Or alternatively, that all these kids wouldn't be acting if they got the real change that they're for. But in the meantime, they have a video game dramatizing this and, in my personal opinion, glorifying it. Here we go. So it says initiative. This does not even make sense. Empower them to drive real change against gun violence. There's something missing. Initiative through their gun reform creative company, Energy BBDO. The final exam immerses players in a terrifying scenario that mirrors the tragic events their son experienced. The Oliver family hopes this unique gaming experience will cause people to understand and push for legislative action. There it is. Legislative action. We have a crisis, in my opinion, and I'm going to make a case for it using other people's work, not my own. We have a crisis of epic proportions in terms of philosophy and morality in this country, which then feeds mental illness. This is my argument. And they're making it about legislation. You're going to fix this with laws. No, you're not. We have laws. It's already illegal to bring guns to a school. It's already illegal to shoot up a school. It's already illegal to even threaten to do any of these things. We've seen that schools have repeatedly not followed the law in many cases, and local law enforcement have not enforced laws that could have prevented, for example, the Cruz shooter, this guy at Parkland, from having his gun. He was not arrested and not arrested and not arrested. And why? Because the incentive was to not suspend students because they would lose money thanks to the Barack Obama policy of trying to drive, equity of discipline or what have you. That kid had been displaying violent tendencies. He'd been suspended. He was, in fact, kicked out of school. He was violent towards his foster mother. He was a time bomb, a ticking time bomb. So many adults failed to act, including the resource officer in the building who hid. There were cameras that went straight to the police department. There were no extra laws. In fact, nobody has been able to identify a new law that would have prevented this. And I would recommend to you reading the book Why Meadow Died by Max Eden, so you could really understand the other side of this. And this upsets me because there will be people, first of all, who would give this to their child, this game. And secondly, to turn your kid into an activist. So you're going to immerse them in a violent simulation. That I'm sure that's, without any negative consequence. And then you're going to, because you hope that's going to turn them into activists for this stuff. It says, snippets from the teaser show the eerie setting. The press release stated that the game was based on real data from school, and every detail from the escape timeframe to the drills, sounds, alarms, messages on the wall, and objects left behind were recreated to provide an immersive and sobering experience. In short, to scare them to death. I'm sorry, there is nothing constructive that can come from putting kids in a traumatizing, terrifying experience that is that close to real life. And I just don't understand the upside of that. Throughout the game, players will encounter data hidden in school books, boards, and maps offering information about school shootings in the U.S. Additionally, the game highlights 5 critical bills aimed at preventing future tragedies. And again, look at these bills. Assault weapons ban. That is not going to solve this, because you will not be able to find, collect, whatever, the probably over 300,000 semi-automatic rifles in this country, 300 million rifles in this country. You're not going to. It's not going to happen. Just forget about it. People are not going to hand them in. And if you think that you want the kind of government powerful enough, like Kamala Harris says she's going to do, to come into your house and try to find them, I would suggest that is a world 10,000 times more violent than anything that's going on in these schools. You do not want that. Nobody should want that. It's not going to happen. Okay. They might pass it, but you won't get rid of the guns, is my point. There are already places where it is difficult to get these guns. We know this for a fact. It doesn't stop the violence. Barack Obama put these kind of guns on the street with the Fast and Furious program. Do you remember? Has everybody forgotten? Did we memory hold that one? How many of those weapons were put on the street intentionally to see where they go, and oopsie, we lost them? They're still out there, guys. You're not gonna, this is a pipe dream. Secure storage, Ethan's laws. Okay, those laws already exist. As you know, I mean, you can already get in big trouble if your guns are just unlocked and left to run in most states. In most states. Okay, that's not why. That's not why. There are plenty of families that have rifles for hunting and all kinds of. The kid doesn't take the gun into school and start shooting people. That's a problem up here. And I'm not just saying mental health. This is a cultural problem. And the reason it happens at school, the same 14-year-old kid could take the same weapon and go somewhere else, some other soft target. They go to school for a reason. And that's what we need to talk about. Ban of high capacity magazines. So they'll take 5 or 6 low capacity magazines. Well, I mean, what? Universal background checks for all gun sales. Already have that. We already have that. What they're trying to trick you into believing is we don't have that. And really, the problem lies already with government, that they're not, the systems are not talking to each other very well. They haven't been updated very well. And that's their problem. Passing a new law is not going to fix their technological problem that they're, over a decade behind in fixing. Raise the minimum age to purchase to what? So you want to be able to get someone to register for selective service. That's 18. Send them off to war if need be, or ask them to volunteer to go die and handle a gun, but they shouldn't be able to have one on their own. What? How does that make any sense? Now, if you want to get rid of selective service, get rid of any possibility of a draft and stop the forever wars, we can have a conversation about that. While we should also, while we're at it, raise the minimum age for voting, because you don't take away somebody's Second Amendment right and then lower the age of voting, which is what the same people want to do. Oh, vote for your leaders, but you can't have Second Amendment rights. Pick one. They're either old enough to make these decisions or they're not. Decide. The same people will tell you a 13-year-old, or better yet, a 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old is fully capable of deciding what body parts they don't want anymore, or that they really would prefer to not ever go through puberty. That's fine. They can make this life-altering decision, but when they're 18, they shouldn't be able to purchase a weapon for any reason. Okay. Yeah. Logic, no. Players will collect all the bills. Who collect all the bills will have the option to survive and escape. Wow. Be politically correct and you can survive. Symbolizing a win in the game. The final exam is designed for computer play. Will be available to download on Friday. This isn't the first time the Oliver family used standout tactics that call out politicians for change. Now, I don't begrudge them wanting to, lobby their politicians, whatever. I just personally, I can't imagine what they've gone through. I'm not going to pull punches. I think this is disgusting. That's Deb's opinion. Take it or leave it. Your mileage may vary, but I personally think it's disgusting. So what do you guys think? Do you have any thoughts about this game? Because I'd love to hear it. I personally think it's gross. But I do want to get into what I had said, was the real point of this. And I'm going to be leveraging writings from Brad Thompson on his Substack called Redneck Intellectual. If you're not subscribed, I highly recommend it to you. He is the head of the Center for the Study of Capitalism at Clemson University. He has written several books, homeschooled his children, just absolutely an expert on this, and has 3 essays that we're going to touch on today. I'm also going to look at one of Pam's about feelings charts and so forth. And I'm going to reference this wonderful book. I've done a show with the author of this book, Jeremy Adams, but it's called Hollowed Out. And there's a lot in here that kind of echoes what Brad is saying. And hopefully you'll catch on to the theme. First, let me take a look at what some of you have to say. So hi, Adrian. She says, so Sophia says, I was going to ask that, do you think there's an incentive to have it appear on the books that there's no violence in schools? 100%, just like the crime statistics that don't get reported don't appear in the crime statistics, and cities look a lot safer than they actually are. If you don't report it, it doesn't get noted. BL says we had bomb threats, all fake, in high school back in the 70s. Bomb threats actually come in more often than shooting threats. And the Columbine attack, if you recall, was meant to be, there were bombs. What they intended to do was blow up the entire school and then shoot people as they were trying to escape. But their bombs didn't go off, and so they pivoted and they did what they did. Um, A Baker says, my son is about to have a shooter drill happening next week at his school. I'm unsure how I feel about them having it. I appreciate the discussion. Well, I hope this helps. I don't know what to say. They sort of do need to know what to do in the event of, like, what should they do? I question the sort of shelter in place, hide kind of thing. And I don't know what all they're teaching them, but I think that students who are taught that they should, run, like, try to escape first, if you can safely escape. Second, would be to, try to hide. If you cannot escape, you try to hide. And the third one that is absolutely viable is fight back. Now a lot of people say, well, how would you do that? What would you do? Well, I mean, there are a lot of different theories, but cowering in a corner when somebody walks in the room, there are a lot of things in a classroom that can be used to throw off a shooter. Yes, that gun is very powerful, but it is meant for long range shooting. It is extremely powerful up close, but it's certainly easier to hit a non-moving target. So if the students learned how to, pick things up, throw things, shove the desk in their way, create a diversion, throw books, throw staplers, throw pens, pencils, like literally everything you can get your hands on is far better than just cowering and crying. And I don't mean to sound glib or rude, but if you are finding yourself in that situation, you got to use every tool that you've got to fight back. And believe it or not, sometimes it works. Even people in close situations have managed to throw something and knock the weapon out of the person's hands. Then you can grab it, but you cannot just cower. And certainly running away and getting out is your best bet. Get the hell out of the building. So knowing where all the exits are and so on is good. Also, I think that what they don't do in these drills is they don't teach children how to check, even as they go through the building, are the doors to the outside closed? Do you know how many times my daughters would report to me the doors were propped open? What the hell? They're supposed to be closed. So, they can keep an eye on their own safety. Report it if they see something open. Another thing, all they see something, say something, report these situations. That prevention is the best medicine. If somebody seems like they're having trouble, report it. You cannot just let these things go and build and build. And if the child doesn't get a response, they need to come tell you. And you just don't let it go. I understand wanting to report things anonymously, but I wouldn't just report it and hope that someone's doing something, because I will tell you they're probably not. All right. Lone Dissenter says the statists are willing to blame everything except what's actually happening to kids every day in the schools against which the kids are acting out. Yes, and that's what we're going to talk about. And then Ego Brain says none of their proposals will stop it or slow it. It's ridiculous. I wonder about the drills, though. It makes sense to teach kids what to do, but a lot of times it's student doing it so they'll know the drill. True, exactly, and definitely never prop the outside doors open. So there are safety precautions that should be taken. One way in, one way out is something they have, for example, in Israel. There aren't multiple ways to get out of the building. And people say, well, fire code, but I get it. But if you're going to have other doors that are exit doors for fire, et cetera, they should only open they should only open out, which most school doors are supposed to do. But a lot of times they get propped open for a variety of reasons. And never, ever let that go. In Uvalde, Texas, that was the case. Okay. So this just should never happen. So speaking of Uvalde, he opens up his essay. This is from 2022, Our Killing Schools Part 1. I'm going to sort of fast forward because he goes through a little bit of the history of these school shootings, but he gets down to, the questions that people ask and so on. And here's what he says. He says, my thesis is as simple as it will be controversial. Let me make this bigger. So if you guys want to read along, if you don't like my reading, you can read along. My thesis is as simple as it will be controversial. I argue that the theory and practice of progressive education, the dominant educational philosophy in American schools, is the root cause of the intellectual and moral chaos that defines our education system and the crisis of our teenage boys, because it is teenage boys doing it. We need to accept that. Now, you might say, what about Audrey Hale? That's a little bit of a separate issue, which this show is not going to be long enough to cover. But Let's look at the vast majority of them, okay, are teenage boys. You could argue that in the Audrey Hale case, it's similar in that you have somebody with a major identity crisis going on, somebody who is hollowed out, possibly influenced by chemical substances that they're taking because of their identity crisis, which is very similar to some of these boys. And while we can't draw, a cause effect relationship, there certainly is a high correlation between these things, and they all stem from the same place, which is the dominant educational philosophy in our schools. My working hypothesis asks readers to take seriously the possibility that our schools are teaching toxic ideas that have created a generation of morally mutant teenage killers, modern day Frankensteins, if you will, who are targeting and attacking the principal source of their frustration, anger, and hatred. That's the school part. So, as I said in the title image, we've got to talk about the location. These are called school shootings. They're not just shootings. And while we can all point to, well, there was that one in the movie theater, and then there was this other thing, and there was like, yeah. And those are not the majority of the situations. They do have one thing in common, though. They're soft targets. They're targets where they know people are vulnerable. Nobody's going to be armed in there because you're not allowed to carry a weapon. And they're still young men primarily doing them. Okay. There's something going on. People are taking out this rage, and it is primarily these teenage boys. Um, More ominously, I am suggesting that America's teenage school shooters and bombers represent only the most dramatic and heinous symptoms of an infectious intellectual disease that is destroying the minds and souls of America's children. For many Americans, possibly the most disturbing quality of these teen terrorists is their seemingly ordinary and innocent appearance. This is not uniformly true, but mostly true. Consider the sociological profile of these adolescent boys. First, the killers were seemingly and mostly ordinary boys from small town or suburban America. Notice these things don't happen in the urban schools with the metal detectors and so on. I've had people write to me and say, we just need metal detectors. They don't happen where they're metal detectors. Well, that's one way to extrapolate from that data. Another way is to say they don't happen in urban settings. Different things happen. Drive-bys, fights, et cetera, stabbings, other kind of violence, gang violence, so forth. But this phenomenon seems to be a suburban phenomenon, primarily in suburban and rural. Okay. And he says, second, they range in age from 11 to 18 with an average age of 15 to 16. Third, most of the boys had no past criminal record, history of violence. Indeed, some seemed rather nerdish and straight out of Boy Scout Central casting. In other words, not one of these boys fit the image of a typical schoolyard thug. Not one of them was a tough, a punk, or a gangbanger. They didn't have criminal records. It's also interesting to note that none of the school massacres has occurred in a big city. So we just talked about that. Your typical teenage thug is not on his school's honor roll, does not sob uncontrollably immediately after committing an act of violence, nor does he commit suicide. What most Americans first saw in the scared faces of these adolescent killers was not so much an evil monster, but rather the boy next door. And I know it's hard to think of them that way because they've just committed these heinous acts. Or if we look at Nick Cruz, who probably was a victim of fetal alcohol syndrome, if you look at his physical appearance, that is highly likely. You still don't see necessarily a monster. They just did something monstrous. So he talks about how, you know, in college, a college professor, he says, every year I meet hundreds of recently graduated high school students, and I'm most often struck by four things. First, that students are poorly educated. Second, that they hated their high school experience. They didn't just dislike, they hated it. Third, that they're unwilling to make moral judgments. This is so key. And finally, that they have inflated opinions of their level of knowledge and they're not open to criticism. That's a pretty explosive mixture, wouldn't you say? The result is an often explosive mixture of ignorance, resentment, nihilism, and narcissism. Thus, the crisis of our schools is a philosophical issue. And so then he goes on to talk about progressive education in the next essay, which is entitled Progressive Education in Our Killing Schools. Here you have the people going into the building. He went through, he says what he went through, the history before and so on. So now we're going to talk about what progressive education is. Now, you would think, If you've watched this channel for a while, you're like, "I know, Deb, you don't need to go over it again." But maybe people are new here, so I do have to go through it again a little bit. Um, Basically, it says progressive education is a radical theory of teacher instruction that has been the reigning intellectual orthodoxy in American schools for over a century. Launched in the last decade of the 19th century by John Dewey and his associates, the theory of progressive education infiltrated America's teacher training institutions in the years just before World War I. So this is not some woke since 2016 COVID based phenomenon. This has been going on since the beginning, percolating down and through the elementary and secondary schools during the following decades. Progressive education then and now rejects traditional values and methods of teaching and learning. By the way, even in traditional schools. So, unless it is explicitly a classical school where they explicitly are doing instructor led, lecture, teaching, rote learning, and all the, sage on a stage kind of stuff, even in the Catholic schools, even in other private schools. This is not exclusive to your government school, but it is the exclusive one used in public school, right? It's just that a lot of private schools do the same thing because the teachers are educated the same way, because the pedagogues are educated the same way, the curriculum developers are educated the same way, even the politicians who make education policy are educated the same way. They actually don't know, most of them, that there's another way. They genuinely believe this is the way. You've gone through progressive schools. You are sitting there watching me have likely gone through progressive schools. Say like 99% of you. I did too. Until I got to private high school. And even then it was about 50-50 because the private schools were just beginning to like adopt a lot of this. So this is the way it's been. And the only thing that maybe inoculated those of us who are older is that it hadn't gotten into the heads of all the teachers to the level that it has now. It also had not gotten quite as, you know, quite as embedded in terms of uh, the focus on feelings and empathy and so on. So the anti-conceptualism, which we're about to talk about, has been the rage for over 100 years. The feelings thing, the empathy thing, that's more new. That's since Columbine. And ironically, that was they really turned up the heat on that because they said this will prevent another Columbine. This was the result of bullying. So what we have to do is be all in our feelings, and we have to care about mental health and anti-bullying campaigns and or your self-esteem and self-esteem programs, anti-bullying campaigns. That really started in the late 80s. Roughly 1984, it began. Then by the time Columbine happened, it really just, they doubled down. It was like, not enough. We need to do more. It's almost axiomatic at this point that whatever the education establishment tells you we need to do more of is the problem. That should be almost like maybe that's the exact thing we need to get rid of. I mean it. I'm not making a joke. They just keep doubling down on the worst possible things. So not just their traditional values, it gets rid of all those methods of teaching and so on. And what that does is it rejects the idea that the purpose of education is to develop the minds of each child by training them to think logically. Then you might think, well, what about critical thinking? No, that is no longer the point. The critical in critical thinking today is critical theory, not logic. For Dewey, the ideal academic curriculum would dispense with facts, laws, information, and with various bodies of external fact labeled geography, arithmetic, grammar. That's a quote. Another progressive educator put it this way: we must overcome the fetishism of the alphabet, of the multiplication table, of grammars, of scales, and basically the worship of books. Okay. In other words, knowledge and logical thinking are not the goals of this approach. According to progressive education theory, children are the subjective creators of their own knowledge, the active builders of knowledge, little scientists. Although without background knowledge, even scientists, I'm pretty sure don't get a lot done. But anyway, who are constantly creating and testing their own theories of the world. They believe that knowledge is not transmitted directly from one knower to another, but is actively built up by the learner. Progressive education assumes that each child can generate for himself out of nothing the accrued wisdom of civilization. In other words, each child should reinvent the wheel on his own without others in a group. And what have we added since? We've added not just that you're going to create your own reality and create your own knowledge and all that, but we've added that it's all really relative, that there is no objective truth, no objective right and wrong. And in fact, it's bad to judge. So, do you think that might set children up for some instability in terms of figuring out what's right, what's wrong, what to expect from other people, what to not expect from other people? Yeah, I'm thinking maybe. All right. So he says progressive education also focuses on problems and processes rather than academic subjects and logical thinking. And the overriding problem addressed by progressive educators is how to live in a society defined by a communal ethos. The process used to solve the problem encourages children to first live in the present and be concerned with their immediate needs and desires. Second, work together in groups in order to cope with life's daily challenges, preparing a meal, getting a job, etc. So forget individualism, forget being responsible for your own thoughts, feelings, etc. Now it's about community, groups, group identities, belonging. Sound familiar? So where does the kid go for whom this isn't working? Where they're not coping and the reality of the present is not so very comfortable and they're not able to take any kind of comfort in friends or group projects or group work or whatever. And they just feel like they're floating. There's nothing to hold on to, nothing to give them a sense of order in their lives. And internally, there's nothing to hold on to because remember, they're supposed to create it all. So they don't have anything to go back to refer to strive for, to look forward to. Nothing as a guide. You're on your own, kid. I think that might cause some problems. All right. And then it says, this is why progressive educators favor something called project teaching. So we know about that, right? The individual's pursuit of objective knowledge is viewed by progressive theorists as inherently selfish and therefore contrary to the purpose of education, which is to adjust individuals to the needs of a greater collective good. God forbid you don't want to do that. God forbid you resent that. God forbid you're just bad at it. You're just not good at it. You're an introvert, you're shy. People, for whatever reason, don't warm up to you. You're not really sure how to talk to other people, or you're embarrassed. You're embarrassed of your home life. You're embarrassed of your parents. You're embarrassed of your appearance. Any number of things are making it difficult for you to function that way. And it's not okay for you to just be okay on your own. It's made abundantly clear to you that you exist for the collective good. And more importantly, your goal in life is to achieve collective consciousness. This is what he talks about here, where he says, at first glance, then, progressive education seems to consist of two contradictory approaches to education. On the one hand, it promotes a child-centered curriculum that seeks to nurture each child's individuality and self-expression. And on the other, it promotes a curriculum that seeks to integrate children into a greater collective consciousness. This is a logical progression, not a contradiction. Before a student can submit to the subjective declarations of the group, he must first accept that all beliefs are by their nature a matter of subjective creation. Once a student abandons his capacity to acquire a first-handed objective knowledge of reality, rooted in his own perception of reality, he is able to move to another higher form of subjectivism of the group. In sum, teachers in progressive classrooms are responsible for liberating and then socializing the needs, passions, opinions, and interests of their charges. They basically go to war on conceptual thought. It's just toxic. I could read all of this to you, but I'm not going to. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is the third in the series, nihilism and our killing schools, because the outcome of the progressive education is that these teenage boys have been affected by it such that they are now nihilists. They don't care about anything. They're not, like I said, they're not really given anything to hold on to. It's like, first, we're going to tear down everything. We'll get rid of the olds. Remember, nothing from the past is worth knowing. You create all the knowledge. You're going to create it, co-create it, whatever. And that's all you need to know is what you've created and what other people created. Now you're liberated, but you still have to move towards collective consciousness, whether you like it or not. If you can't get there, try harder, do the work, or there's something wrong with you, basically. And if you have even the smallest bit of striving in you, if you personally want more, that's going to be a tremendous conflict. That, or you just feel like you're bad at it. Very destabilizing. And remember too, these kids are cooped up in the building most of the day. They don't do as much recess. They don't get out and run around. Not everybody's involved in sports. They're eating almost a poison diet of garbage food, especially if they eat the free lunch in the cafeteria. And they have social media, TV, entertainment, all these things sending them messages, almost all of which are aimed at making them feel something. Most of the time, that feeling is resentment, envy, some kind of negative feeling, anger, frustration. Not a whole lot out there of like, isn't it great to be alive? Look at the beauty of nature. Look at what a wonderful world we live in. No, the world's coming to an end in 12 years because if we don't save it, if you don't fix it, kid, everything's going to end. Or, oh, this person's going to end democracy. Oh, this one's a communist. Well, you might think they're true. That's not really the point. These kids are marinating in negativity. They're marinating all this and they have nothing to hold on to. Remember, we live in the eternal now. And by the way, the now sucks. You have to fix it, kiddo. Bye-bye. Have a nice night. I mean, it's a wonder any of them are psychologically healthy. It takes probably all the effort of their parents when they come home to keep them grounded. So he says, the question we must now confront is, how does progressive education theory and practice translate into the lives of Americans' teenage boys? More to the point, what is the relationship between it and the school shootings of the last 25 years? The philosophic and pedagogic genealogy of these ideas is complex, and the ways in which they impact and trigger particular boys would require a deep psychological study of each one of these boys that goes well beyond the scope of this essay. I also recognize that each one of these boys is unique, et cetera, et cetera. He says, before you read on, I'd like you to scroll back up to the top of the page and look at the photographic montage of some of the adolescent American boys who've either committed a mass shooting or been arrested for plotting to shoot up their school or to bomb it. Take a good look at them and ask yourself this question: why are America's teenage or pre-teenage boys targeting their schools? Now, let's look at the picture. Look at these boys. I mean, those are the Columbine shooters right there, these two. I mean, do they look like monsters right out of the gate? Now, we think we know what they've done, so you might think that now, but I mean, this one here looks he looks okay. But the point is, they're just young boys. Some of them have the dead stare, but some of them don't. If you just saw them walking down the street, you wouldn't say, oh, I'm afraid of that kid. That's his point. You wouldn't necessarily be afraid of just by looking at them. Look, here's this kid right here, being perp walked. That's a kid who made a threat. The crisis of America's teenage boys is a philosophical crisis. The cognitive consequence of progressive education, if not the intent, is to retard the reasoning minds of our children and to deform their moral constitutions. Now, why would they do that? Why would they want to do that? If you genuinely believed, as many progressive educators do, that the morals, mores, standards, roles, etc. of the past are wrong, not just wrong, but oppressive. And not just wrong and oppressive, but the root of all the problems of humankind since forever. That we actually can't, not only do we create reality, but we can create a perfect reality, utopia, the perfect human, if we just throw out all of this old, tired stuff that is bad and replace it with something new and good and perfect and pure. Now, what's weird is they don't know what that would look like. I mean, they sort of imagine it and think they can imagine it into being, manifest it into being. What's missing here? Any recognition of the reality of humankind, that humans are, while we might be very evolved animals, we still are animals. There's also lack of any recognition that there is something called objective reality because they don't believe there is. Very important. They genuinely believe we each create our own reality. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters because if you believe that, then you're in constant conflict with everybody else's reality, aren't you? I mean, you want yours to be one way, somebody else wants theirs to be there, and I want to be tolerant of yours, but when theirs backs up on yours, now we have conflict and no way to resolve it. In a world where we recognize objective reality and we recognize that, mine can't cross over into yours. We live in the same world and there's boundaries. And that's when we have laws and that's why we have rules and that's where we have social mores and manners and all kinds of things to keep us from trampling all over each other. That's how we have civilization. When you remove that and say, no, no, we have to tolerate all these individual constructions of reality, well, how do you set a standard that you can expect anybody else to live by? How do you set boundaries? What is the purpose of boundaries anymore? If everybody's reality is to be tolerated, so everyone feels like they belong to what? Right? It's just almost like nonsensical. So, by teaching and promoting intellectual subjectivism, progressive education breaks down a student's capacity for conceptual learning, resulting in pervasive anxiety. Like I said, there's nothing to hold on to due to the student's inability to intellectually grasp reality and cope with it. By teaching and promoting moral relativism, progressive education breaks down a student's capacity to make independent, reality-based moral judgments. By teaching and promoting groupthink and group acceptance, progressive education breaks down a student's reality-based self-esteem in favor of an other-oriented pseudo-self-esteem characterized by conformism and narcissism. Now, if you're the person who doesn't fit in, what happens? Like I said, it seems contradictory, right? Everybody has their own individual reality, but you're supposed to belong. You're supposed to be part of the group. You're supposed to live for others. What if the others are mean to you? What if the others ignore you? What if, you just don't feel comfortable around other people? There's so many what ifs that aren't accounted for. The net result for those students affected is perpetual anxiety, aimless self-expression, or preoccupation with the standards of the group, either in conforming to the group or rebelling against it. A substitution of narcissism for reality-based self-esteem and moral nihilism, which can take the form of refusing to make moral judgments and enacting vicious fantasies. And if you are struggling to differentiate between your fantasy and reality, or you think you don't need to, and you have impulse control, and you struggle with, tolerating discomfort because you've been told you shouldn't have to, of course. Everybody has to tiptoe around your feelings and don't trigger you and all this, then why would you rein yourself in? So he says, let us now consider how progressive education translates into the life of an ordinary American child, whom we shall identify as the new model boy or the boy next door. At the age of 5 or 6, our fictional boy leaves home for the first time to attend school. He is thrown into a foreign environment with hundreds of other children, all of whom are beginning to understand the world in conceptual terms. Almost immediately, though, the progressive theories and practices that dominate his school begin to stunt his conceptual faculty. The whole language reading technique and whole math cripple the conceptual development of his mind and keep him bound to the perceptual level of cognition. So it's like what he perceives is real, and there is no hard real, like 2 + 2 = 4. Progressive education impedes our new model boy's capacity to think long term and to think independently. Why would he need to? If the past doesn't matter, if we throw all that out, then what's to say that tomorrow I can't throw out yesterday? And next year I can't throw out last year? Where does the past begin and end? And where does the future begin? And what am I looking forward to anyhow? What are my goals? What are my aspirations and why? That's more importantly, why? Why do I live? Why am I here? What is the point of any of this? Everything my parents did, my grandparents did, doesn't matter. We're throwing it out. So what does that mean for me and all the things I'm going to do? Now, they may not be able to articulate it this way. They may not talk about it this way, but imagine what goes through the mind of someone who's just told that none of it matters. It's today. All right. Progressive education tells the thinking boy to go along to get along, to compromise what he knows to be true and right, and to conform to the whims of the pack. And it's doubly true, believe it or not. The kid, you said, well, what if the kid has a great home life with parents with great morals? Super. Now he lives in perpetual conflict. I go to school, they tell me one thing. I go home, they tell me another thing. Which is true? Who's the authority? Who whose reality do I believe, do I agree with? And if I want to go with mom and dad's and then I'm in school for 8 hours a day in this completely foreign environment with people who are essentially telling me that mom and dad are wrong. And if I decide to conform to the school, I go home and mom and dad are the enemy. Now, some kids may be able to take that in stride, but some can't. And I submit to you that these particular young men are amongst the group who cannot. Um, Imagine the psychic inner turmoil that he must now experience day in and day out. He's told to act in two contradictory ways: to express his individuality and to conform to a greater collective consciousness. His inability to project a long range future beyond the powerful emotions of the here and now, and his reluctance to rely on his own judgment creates in him a sense of impotence and helplessness. Now, when it's not always the case, but typically the more typical reaction is when girls experience this sense of impotence and helplessness, they tend to turn it in on themselves. This is where you find things like eating disorders, gender dysphoria, um, self harm, even worst case scenario, right? Boys typically, hormonally, traditionally, et cetera, tend to act outward. Not always. Sometimes they manifest the same behaviors that the girls do, but it is more likely that aggression, that frustration comes out in a variety of ways. As the school stunts the cognitive faculty of our boy next door, he also works to readjust his moral and social attitudes. Whilst at home, he receives a moral education of one kind or another, and he's accustomed to judging and being judged. His parents teach him that certain kinds of behavior are acceptable and others not. He arrives at school, however, enters an entirely new, and this is what I was talking about. His teachers begin to subtly wean him from the closed and authoritarian morality of his parents. At first, they refused to give him any kind of moral instruction. In fact, the teachers seem to tolerate and sometimes even to celebrate behaviors that he thinks are wrong. Oh, well, you have to understand, and let's do some restorative justice, and you need to get, their trauma and where they're coming from. Meanwhile, the kid's like, but they just broke every rule. Yes, but. Or you both have to sit and have a conversation with each other. So they learn that justice doesn't, the justice that they've learned about, or that makes sense to them at a visceral level. The person who did something wrong, suffers a consequence, and the person who didn't doesn't. Now, both people are suffering a negative consequence. That doesn't make any sense. That can build up as resentment over time. He is forbidden from judging morally the ideas and actions of others. The only moral imperative is that he must get along, share, adapt, and accept the needs and values of all the other children. He's now stuck in a no man's land of moral confusion. Now, the flip side of this, because you might think, well, a lot of times these kids have a history of, they're the ones acting out. They're the discipline problems. They're not just being all good and they snap. I grant you that's true. But sometimes those kids act out because they're expecting certain behavior or tolerance from others. They've been told they should be able to. And of course, human beings are human beings and human kids are human kids. And we're going to pretend that's not true in the progressive environment, but it is true. And the kids start feeling, that their sense of like, why aren't you including me? Why don't I belong? Why don't I have friends? Why am I not, why is the promise of all of this collective stuff not reaching me? And that narcissism can come out of, I'm entitled to it. You didn't give it to me and now you'll be punished. So it can be one or the other or a little bit of both. It's not all, one thing. It's just unhealthy. The main point is this is not how we raise well-adjusted, boundaried, moral people. Not knowing how or why our new model boy begins to think that something is wrong for the first time in his life, he begins to experience moral confusion, doubt, and anxiety, et cetera, et cetera. So I would really encourage you to read all these. I hope I'm sort of making the overall point about the importance of taking a look at how we're educating our kids, the philosophy behind it, the lack of moral grounding. Like I said, this book, Hollowed Out, I think is a must read. It gets deep into this. Here are the titles of the chapters. They are, and I did do a show about this with the author. You can go find it in my YouTube stuff. But the chapters are, I should have marked, here we go. A Hollow Generation, hollowed out selves, hollowed out culture, hollowed out schools. 'Cause remember, we don't have any, we used to have like the golden rule, the certain standards, don't do this, don't do that, do this. I mean, it was pretty clear what you can and can't do. And now it's like everybody's, everything's okay and whatever. And the discipline is meted out so strangely that it's hard to figure out what the values are. Hollowed out homes. Again, we do have more homes that are not functioning very well. And one could argue, I would argue, that that is yet another consequence of over 100 years of progressive education, morally void education. And then hollowed out democracy. Okay. So again, everybody has a voice. Everybody's opinion matters. The majority rules. We don't have any limiting principles that we're supposed to live by and respect. It's, mine. I want mine. I want real democracy. And I've got one more person than you on my side. Therefore, I'm right. That's hollowed out morally. It might be democracy, but it's hollow. There's nothing in there. So what Pam wrote, and I think this adds on to what we've been talking about, is on top of all of the progressive education I just told you about, we're getting all up in their feelings. So, we talk about micromanaging this confusion and making it worse. Now they're adding all of these descriptions of their feelings so we can spend all of our time not in being productive and competent and learning things to actually cope with the reality in front of us, but to just spend time talking about how we're coping, which isn't good, by the way, for anyone. For adults, spend a day just ruminating in your own thoughts, see how happy you are at the end of the day. So she talks about her time working as a school counselor for youth with behavioral issues. And she would turn to feeling charts to help students understand and express their feelings so they didn't resort to throwing furniture. So they're struggling to express themselves. She would use it for that purpose. She says, it's tough to witness concepts that you believe in being used widely in the wrong context and causing harm. Psychology is supposed to be done on an individual basis. Some people need to learn more about feelings. However, many people need to focus less on their feelings. This is something we all once knew. But just like everything else, what was once common knowledge has now been thrown out the window. Like it used to be common knowledge that we should teach kids just straight up, you don't hit people and you don't take their stuff. And if you do, bad things are going to happen. And the bad thing that might happen to you unsupervised is you get hit back. Someone's going to take your stuff back. You'll get hit harder. So we're going to step in and as adults, and we're going to have a bad thing happen that's slightly more benign. And that is you're going to be suspended. You're going to go to the office. You're going to, get a call home to mom or dad so that you can, learn that we don't do these things so you don't do it again. That's just getting in the way of the worst possible negative reaction if we do nothing. So now we're not doing that. Adults are not getting in the way of that. Instead, we're coming in and getting all up in their feelings, but we're not actually doing anything that the child might perceive as meting out justice. So she says, but what's the big deal really? What's wrong with all the children learning to be more in touch with their emotions and learning more ways to express them? This sounds like a dream for a therapist until you think about it a little more. I brought this topic up in my Instagram stories and I received some great comments from followers. So the first one she says is rumination. And I think this is an obvious negative side effect for using feeling charts. There are kids who already spend too much time focused on their feelings. And with these charts being used regularly, we are emphasizing self-focus. So kids are already a little self-absorbed. That's sort of natural, right? Getting them outside of that and focusing on other goals and other tasks and other things is actually pretty healthy for them and everybody else. Telling them, no, keep focusing on you. It doesn't make it easier for you to deal with the fact that not everybody's going to do what you want when you want them to do it. In fact, the opposite is going to be true. So it emphasizing self-focus, putting the microscope on feelings that may otherwise naturally pass if they weren't scrutinized. Kids tend to focus on themselves, and part of maturation is to decrease that tendency. However, the use of feeling charts does the opposite. One mom wrote, things like this, feeling charts were terrible for our teen daughter. She'd hyper-focus, self-diagnose, and get so dramatic about it. She's much happier being away from all this junk now that she's an adult with a job. So, busy, doing something else, getting outside of your own head, not staring at your navel, much better. Feeling charts teach kids how to perform feelings. I see this all the time. All the time. When you're a calm when you are a calm, stable kid, not every moment is full of big feelings, and that's a good thing. By teaching kids to name how they feel and showing them pictures of emotional faces regularly, we may be teaching them to perform their feelings and give them new and creative ways to get negative attention. And we also live in a social media environment where getting attention of any kind is a positive, right? Engagement, even adults. Oh, look, I made all these people mad. Now I'm making money. I'm getting likes. I'm getting all this engagement. Well, the kids are not stupid. They pick up on it too. And attention is something that gets, reinforced. It's like that dopamine loop because they'll get it intermittently, which makes it more addictive. Anything you get regularly and predictably is not really addictive, and something you don't get is not addictive. But when you get it, then you don't. You get it, then you don't. You're chasing the dragon, chasing the dragon. Well, we're teaching our kids to do the same thing. Well, I'll perform. Wait, where's the validation for my feelings? And then they get more dramatic. Let me do it bigger. Let me do it more often. Let me do it more boldly, brashly, etc. And it could be that somebody shows up to school and does one of these things because they've tried every conceivable way to get attention. We know the shooter in Georgia did. I need help. I need help. I need help. I need help. The kid was crying out for help in so many different ways and wasn't really getting it. Was supposed to have a meeting very soon, but they weren't lighting their hair on fire about it, were they? Sometimes these things can be, it's tragic because he'll be in jail for the rest of his life, and other people are dead. But this could be the whole, am I performing my feelings big enough for you to notice now? And I'm not trying to be glib. I'm serious. This is how bad it can get. So then we have over-identification with feelings. This is a huge risk. And I also think that this is something that drives people to violence. I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry, I'm angry. This is who I am. I'm an angry person. And it's just my identity. Emotional regulation becomes a responsibility of others. Validate me, affirm me, take care of me. I can't calm myself down. And that's one of the things that restorative justice does, in my personal opinion, is by having this whole structure, and we've all got to come together and have a conversation that's mediated by adults. Everything is dealt. You talk now. You talk, and when are the children learning to just cope? You did something you shouldn't have done. Now there's a consequence. Go off and cope with it. Deal with it. Person who was wronged, you've been heard. Justice has, been served. But we're not going to pet you and, pamper you, whatever. Just we're taking care of it. We're not going to indulge the victimhood. We just took care of it. Feeling charts can create too much attention from others. Well, absolutely. Once they figure out that if I pick big enough feelings and I'm entitled to empathy from other people, and then I'm not getting it, I can demand it some more. And then maybe those kids, I can bully them by crying. And they'll have to pay attention to me because I cried. Oh, it's okay. We're all here for you. We love you, whatever. So these are some of the costs. This is from Pam. Here's some of the costs of these feeling charts. And so what is this? How do I pull this all together? My point, just like Brad's point, and I think to a certain extent Pam's, and if you go back to the show, even Cindy, is that we need to change the philosophy behind our education. We can put all the gun laws in place we want. We can do drills. We can put more locks on the doors. We can have armed guards. We can do all those things. We're not going to change the moral rot. And I believe it's that leads to the mental health problem, not that the mental health problem is manifesting in immoral behavior. I genuinely believe we have it backwards. And in fact, everything we're doing to treat it like it's a mental health problem is making it worse. exponentially worse. And I think we are lucky we've had as few of these events as we've had. There will doubtless be more, tragically. And unless and until we push back hard on the entire way that we're educating our kids, we're not going to get ahead of this. That horrible game is going to do nothing to prevent a school shooting. Nothing. And in fact, because it sort of makes it seem like a game, that survival is a game, that representative democracy is a game to be won or lost, we are absolutely missing the point. And I think not we're doing a disservice to all of the victims of these horrible events. We have to learn from these events. And I think the main lesson we need to learn is these happen in schools for a reason. And one of those reasons is that this is the source of confusion, anxiety, pain, and it gets taken out there. So I'm going to go back and look at some of your comments and see what you guys think of all this. Thank you so much for waiting so patiently to be heard. I appreciate that. All right. So A. Baker then says the likelihood of an event at our school is a fraction of a fraction. I don't think we need them in our school. I'm assuming you mean the drills. We take federal funding, though, it requires us to do them. Yeah. And I hope you're right. Of course, I hope you're right. I do. And I hope that the drills don't then plant ideas in people's heads. Silvar Ogre says it is in all schools because the regulations and standards require it. I'm assuming you mean the drills. All progressive solutions are designed to increase the problem to generate a cycle of problems, reaction, solution. 100%. 100%. Yes. So I'm actually being fairly generous to give anybody in the education world the benefit of the doubt that they aren't really intending to do this. I think some people are, but I mean, not to cause violence, but intending to generate problems. I think there are people very high up who do. They make a lot of money doing this, but I think people just haven't stopped to talk about it or think about it. And because every time one of these events, it's so predictable. Get the guns, more mental health, and then it ends there. It ends there, that it falls to us as, as parents, as taxpayers, as voters, whatever, to say, hey, there's a third thing that nobody's talked about, and that is the meat, the substance in the education is bad. Teach differently. Mr. Blister 808 says, yes, I have talked to a few of my kids' teachers here in Australia, and some have expressed frustration with the curriculum they're being forced to teach. Yep, I think there's a lot of frustration there. Silver says, if they really believed that children taught themselves, they would have abandoned schools and teaching. Isn't it as simple as that? Isn't it as simple as that? That's your tell right there, that they know the kids don't teach themselves. It's all a feint. It's all like, really that's their excuse for not actually teaching knowledge and information, all the things parents think the kids go to school to learn. And they say, like we're just giving them we're creating the climate and the environment, and we're the guides on the side and all this stuff. And it's really just so that you'll continue to send your children there to be socially reprogrammed to be these little collectivists, and they'll kill individualism. Mr. Blister says, I've also noticed a lot of teachers quitting the profession in the last 3 years. Yes, indeed. Now, there are two primary reasons, or many, many reasons why people quit. But I would say the two most common are they're pedagogically misaligned. I don't want to teach this stuff. This is not why I got into teaching. I don't believe in this. I disagree. Okay, that was my reasoning. There are other teachers who leave because it's violent. They're like, I don't feel safe at work. So maybe they haven't given it much thought about what they're teaching, or maybe even in their school, they are, supposed to be teaching kids how to read or whatever to a greater degree, but they don't feel safe. Their working conditions are abysmal, and they have no autonomy to make it any better, because this disciplinary procedure is, you can't discipline anyone, can't send anyone to the office, can't do anything. Well, there's not an amount of money you could pay me to work in a public school right now. I mean it. Seriously, you could come and write me $1 million. Go do it. Nope. Wouldn't do it. Chris Wood says, I think the success of that approach really hinges on the students having secure attachments with their caretakers. I'm assuming you mean with the more sort of progressive approach to education, or, I mean, if that's what you mean, I would argue even then, because the metaphysical problem is still there. You could have the most secure attachment with your child there is, but if you teach your child that reality is subjective, that nothing is real, it's just what they perceive, that's unmooring for most people. It's based on a it's just false. It's just based on a false belief system about reality, a wish, a dream, a prayer that isn't real. Reality exists, and we didn't make it that way. We're not gods. And I think teaching your child that they can create reality is either setting them up for a letdown, no matter how much you love them. Um, Silver says, I didn't go into teaching because I didn't want to be a had I known in 1989 that's what they were doing, I would have never gone into it, but I found out very quickly. Mr. Blister says, Silver agreed. Progressive ideas almost always sound good, but put into practice are tyrannical and destabilizing. Absolutely. And more dangerously, they sleep very soundly at night because they believe they're morally doing good. There's so many quotes along those lines, aren't there? Right? My conscience is clean because my intentions are good. Doesn't matter what's happening in the street. I meant well. Road to hell and all that. Silver says, I still believe what I said in the 80s. All basic math, science, history, philosophy can be taught standing on a beach with a stick to write in the sand. And I agree with you 100%. The root of all error is abandoning reality for magical thinking. There it is. And you've just described progressive education. It is magical thinking. Absolutely magical thinking. Um, Mr. Blucher says, anyone's thoughts on Jaime Escalante, the teacher portrayed in the 80s movies? Well, I have a lot of good things to say about Jaime Escalante. I mean, he lived in reality and he taught his students to function in reality. And he believed in his students and he just focused on, eye on the prize. We're going to learn this math. We're going to do this and you can learn it. And here it is. And it's knowledge that is quantifiable and knowable and learnable, and got them very much grounded in reality and kept them there, gave them a goal, something to shoot for that was worth, having, like this knowledge that can then propel you to other things in the future. And you don't need to feel guilty or selfish about trying to acquire knowledge for your own self. This is perfectly okay, even desirable. And no, you're not going to be encouraged to throw it all out in the future because now it's the past. So that is what we need, more reality or based teachers and schools that support them. I don't know the reality of the story of the movie. Told a good story. Yeah, the reality of the story is equally good. You can look it up. Just curious because victimization is being taught, and I believe he taught in he absolutely did, 100%. DC Isaac says, "Hey Deb, glad I'm catching. Hey, glad I'm catching a live stream. Glad you are too." Silver says, I would agree that the movie shows a teacher who understood boundaries and aspirations and expectations, and that is what we need. Yes, I'm going to share the links. Absolutely. What I'm going to do is, this is the first essay. I'll drop it into the chat, or Killing Schools Part 1. When you get to this one, what you'll be able to do, and I'll pin it, is once you're on his Substack, you will be able to get to the other ones because they're sort of part 1, 2, and 3. They were written at different times. And this is Pam's feeling chart one. But Brad Thompson is a fabulous resource for so many things about education. But this particular subject, he's really dug in on it. And I agree with him. I just agree with his theory. A Baker says, all things not of God down to the emotions. Now, interesting that you point that out. I did record a show that I'm busy editing, and I'll get up hopefully later this week with Classic Liberal from X, about the whole concept of, God and so forth. Whether you're a believer or you're not a believer, the main thing to understand about the progressive education model is that it makes it, when your metaphysics are that humans create the world and create their own reality, you are essentially saying we are God. Now, I'm not a believer, but I know I'm not God. Okay. And if there, I'm agnostic. And if there is a God, here's what I know about God. God creates. I don't. Now, I can respond to reality. I can make things from the things that were created, right? I can interact with reality. I can manipulate the stuff of reality, but I don't create it out of thin air. Okay. And the progressive would say otherwise. This is all perception. It could be a simulation for all you know. We could be actually in the matrix. It's hard to believe that people really believe that, but they sort of do. And this collective consciousness they're talking about, they genuinely believe it. That is antithetical to the monotheism of the great religions, especially Christianity, but even Judaism and Islam, but this it saying you effectively create your own reality, saying you are a god, you are a god. And to me, that's incredibly messed up. Mr. Blister says, how much of this is the fault of the apathy of the citizenry? Our system of governance is only successful if politicians are held to account by the citizens and strong families are made a priority. Now, this is you're correct, but remember what Brad said. This goes all the way back to Dewey. So you're talking about well over 100 years at this point. Yeah, well over, because you're talking about early 20th century, right? So yeah, we were all educated in the progressive way. The entire institution of public education and the Prussian model and so forth was progressive. And so while there might have been some more, rah America stuff in the past, or when, during the race to the moon and the atomic age, there may have been a little bit of let's focus on science. But for the most part, it was still the Dewey model. And that means that the degradation, the demoralization of our culture has been going on in our schools all this time. And by design, we've been turned into more malleable, pliant, cooperative, followers. Anti-individualism goes all the way back. And where it really got solidified is New Deal politics. I highly recommend to everybody watching this that you read the book Freedom's Furies by Timothy Sandifer. It goes into the stories of three women, Isabel Patterson, Rose Wilder Lane, and Ayn Rand, and how things changed in America from sort of the turn of the century through the New Deal and up into, let's say, the early 60s, but spends a lot of time on the New Deal, a ton of time on Roosevelt, and what his policies did to the character of the nation. Our entire sense of self as a people was forever altered because of his administration. It really it started with Wilson, but he just drove a stake through the heart of individualism. And there they were, these three women going, no, right? And they did more than most people of the time to try to draw attention to it, and their work lives on. But it's in the schools. It's in the schools. So which came first, the chicken or the egg? How much can we blame ourselves? I mean, I think we still should. We have to take responsibility, but we also have to understand that you are asking people to stand up for something they aren't even aware of. You're asking them to defend rights they don't really know they have, or they don't understand how they work because the schools have set about to not teach them. And if you come up to the 1980s with Howard Zinn and his version of a people's history of the United States, I mean, my goodness, America's a terrible place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We have all this penance to do. Well, people who were in elementary and middle school in the 80s are now parents. So if that was their education in American values and American rights and American greatness, what would you expect? You wouldn't expect them to be more active, engaged citizens. And that's why you'll see now on Instagram or social media, you'll see people sort of waking up, people in their late 20s, 30s, even young 40s, and they'll make these, you know, somebody told me I should look into that. And I did. I looked into it and I've been lied to all these years. And you'll see, and they're sincere. They genuinely are waking up to the fact that they've been lied to their entire lives. And they're trying to tell other people. The walkaway movement, saw that. You see people now, and it's not partisan. I saw one just today, a guy talking about all the lies that were told about Donald Trump. Now you can like him, hate him, it doesn't matter, but he's been lied about like crazy. And they get away with it. The media gets away with it. And so This guy's sitting there going, um, this isn't even at all true. And he went through and he pulled people are not stupid. They're ignorant. And they're ignorant on purpose. Not they're on purpose, the schools, the colleges. It's on purpose. And so, as Silvar says, the apathy of citizens is a result of the style of education. Exactly right. Exactly right. So Sophia says, I've never understood the obsession with the thing rather than the moral, philosophical, and cultural problems. Because I think it's emotionally satisfying and it feels like an easier fix. It's not. Taking away millions of guns is no easy fix. But focusing on the thing gives people something concrete to hate. It gives people something concrete to vent their spleen at. And if you're already a person who doesn't really care about guns or doesn't like guns or has no respect for the Second Amendment or doesn't understand why it's important because you haven't been taught why it's important, that is emotionally satisfying. It also gets you a lot of approval. If you are trying to get social approval from, your side or whatever, your social milieu, then that is an easy way to get it. Um, and Silver says, literally removing the morals and thus morale of the population. I'm sure most of you have probably seen Yuri Bezmenov's videos. He talks about the demoralization of the West, and here we are. Unknown sailor says school shootings have many causes. Teenagers on SSRI drugs, restorative discipline policies, gun-free school zones where schools are wide open to threats due to legislative mandates. The list goes on. Absolutely. All of those are factors. No question about it. However, I submit to you that the SSRIs wouldn't be prescribed as much if we weren't having kids educated in this progressive manner, all up in their feelings. And we also wouldn't be relying so much on drugs to treat things. We would have better discipline, then the restorative discipline wouldn't be happening. The gun-free school zones wouldn't even really be an issue. We could still have them. We could still have gun-free school zones if those two other things weren't going on and we had a more, grounded education. And then, the various legislative mandates and so on. I just think these are band-aids on band-aids on band-aids. The real problem is philosophical. And all those other things flow from that. Would we really be giving our children drugs for all of these supposed mental health problems if they were busy doing and growing and learning and running around and, pursuing goals and trying to, would we? Or does this have maybe something to do with it? That's what I think. Yes, Mr. Blister School is a social conditioning center, and it has been for over 100 years. Unknown Sailor says, my father was on his high school rifle team. He graduated in 1966. Guns are not the problem. 100% agree. Silvar says, the progressives can't tell reality from fantasy, which is why they must control books, comics, movies, TV, and video games. Isn't it ironic? And this, by the way, is so-called Banned Books Week right now. They're so banned. They're doing this like full court press of like, buy these books. Here's the books. You can get the books over here. Independent booksellers. Here's at the library, whatever. I'm like, yeah, they look real banned. So they can't even use language properly. It's not that they can't tell reality from fantasy. They don't want to. They don't want to. And it's really kind of scary, actually. Jaime Escalante would not be able to do what he did in modern day government schools 100%. That's also sad and scary. And Silver says, redneck intellectual, is that Flannery O'Connor reference? That's a good question. I don't know. You'd have to ask Brad. I'm not sure. Unknown Sailor, John Taylor Gatto has a really good book about public education. Yes, and I did a read along on my channel where I go through each section of his book or each essay that he wrote for those who are interested. And I jokingly call him Howard Sin. I sincerely call him that. Now, after this moment, I will adopt that. BL is currently reading Freedom's First. You are? Yay! I absolutely adore that book. And I feel like poor Timothy Sandifer, I've quoted him so many times on X. He's probably like, this girl's obsessed with me. It's your book, dude. It's a great book. But it really is. And there were so many times I had to stop and, go back over what I just read because I couldn't. When I say I couldn't believe it, it wasn't disbelief. It was more like deja vu, right? And so I'm reading this book thinking, and here we go again. Because when you read this, you will look at our present day situation with this current administration and even the battle that's going on right now in this election. And you'd be like, if anybody knew their history, we wouldn't be doing it. This wouldn't be happening. We are just repeating it almost verbatim. And what scares me is that there was a world war. And it's, I'm not saying, one necessarily caused the other. It's just that this lack of moral footing and tunnel vision and all of the upset going on around the world at the same time is very similar. And the economic turmoil, very, very similar. Um, and then Unknown Sailor says, "Oh, I saw that one the moment I realized Trump was yes, that's the video, exactly, what I'm talking about. I think it's probably gone viral at this point. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, go see if you can search for it. It's really, really good. And you know what I'm talking about, right? The guy's like, he's not alone. There are many, many people who are capable of having that realization. They just have to access the information. So in that way, I am actually very grateful to people like Elon Musk for his, making X an open platform. We can now get things out that we couldn't get out before on social media. You still can't on Meta, Facebook, Instagram. Good luck trying to get certain things out there. Apparently you can on TikTok. I'm not out there. I don't use TikTok, but we have more independent platforms. There's Rumble, there's Substack, there's so many different ways now to get information out that as much as they're trying to crack down, we're still able to speak. I'm here speaking. I'm trying to, even if, 12 people watching, whatever, it's not a lot. I appreciate you guys liking and sharing this because maybe more people will watch and be inspired to dig into this and learn more about it and not play that stupid video game and not scare their kids half to death and not try to get guns banned because that's not going to solve the problem. But that's what we have to do. We just have to keep telling the truth and confronting these things. And when somebody tries to come at you with it's the guns, challenge them and say, why is it always in a school then? If it's the guns, why aren't the 14-year-old kids going out in the neighborhood? Why aren't they doing something else? I mean, not to give them any ideas, but I'm saying, why is it at school? Why there? Last one, let's see. Unknown Sailor says, I've seen a lot of those walkaway videos and they always have a common theme. Like Carrie Smith, I think you mean, talks about, they start with one doubt and that leads down a rabbit hole of more and more. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yes, common theme, right? Rachel says, "Don't give up." I'm not giving up. I'll never get. I'm breathing. I'm not giving up. I can't. I mean, I do have my moments. We all have our moments where we're like getting low, right? Little low feeling. But I try to just keep it real. All right, one more. Silvar, this ties back into this morning's Twitter. If everyone is hollow, then authoritarians like fascists and commies and feminists and misogynists can fill the vacuum with ideology. That's right. That's exactly right. And I do believe, and again, this book, Hollowed Out by Jeremy Adams, great book. My interview with him is on the channel. I do believe that was to a certain degree intentional. And when it comes to the WEF and UNESCO, it's 100% intentional. They are not making any bones about it. They fully intend to replace any existing religions and any existing morality with the new one, right? Agenda 2030 and this theosophical new evolution, blah, blah. It's crazy. So I would encourage you to follow Lisa Logan to learn more about that. Obviously, James Lindsay to learn more about that. There are a wide variety of people you can follow to learn more about these things. So last thing I want to share with you this evening, and then I'm going to thank you guys for coming and go rest my back, is that I am very pleased to have been able to relaunch my community. I'd had a community at Woke Screen, and then I think it was a little complicated. People couldn't figure it out. So I hope this is going to be easier. Parents, this is my support group for you if you are defending education liberty. Now, here are two things that I've done. It is just a Discord, right? Not a fancy site, nothing else, just a Discord. This little video is like a little trailer, tell you about it. But I've simplified it now. It is just a register. It's $12 for the whole year. Okay, I want as many people to have access to this as possible. The reason I have it there is just to keep really truly to keep the riffraff out. All right. It's private. Your privacy will be respected. You are joining a Discord server. The Discord server is where you can converse with me. There's various channels, that you can talk to each other, talk to me. And then once a week, we have a community call. So if you want to come to me with, this is going on at my kid's school, look what I have, et cetera, rather than trying to DM me or whatever, You can drop in any Sunday evening and we can have a chat. You can show me things. You might be the only person there. You might be there with 3 other people. Who knows? But tell your friends, like I said, $12. That's it. And you join the server. And what I'm trying to do is create a place. I hate to say safe space, but okay, there it is, where parents defending education liberty can go, that's off social media, that's private. I'm never going to collect your data or sell your data. And you can actually, ask me a question or talk to other people and collaborate to get the support you need. You might just need a place to go vent or joke around or be like, wow, can you believe this is going on, without the social media minders. Discord's never going to, they don't come in and supervise. So it's just me. And I'm not going to moderate, right? So we're in this together. So that's been relaunched, and hopefully you can spread the word about that. That is here at wokescreen.com/the reason we parent. And yes, I see what you're saying here. Annunciator, be cautious of Discord. They ban for political reasons. They do not go in to a community to supervise it. The reason that has happened, and I certainly hope that none of you watching this would do that, is that somebody comes in and infiltrates. That's why I do have to have some kind of pay plan, right? Somebody comes in and infiltrates and then says, they're talking about things that are mean or whatever. And even then, it's usually been because there's been really out there type of stuff. I doubt they're going to come, somebody's going to infiltrate and say, they're talking about, freedom and education, and they're criticizing the public schools. Discord has bigger fish to fry than come in and talk about, with people who are trying to get a better education for their kids. And that's really what this is this is a support group. We're not there to plot the takeover of anything. We're just there to, if you've got your kids into K-12 education, whether it's public, private, or homeschooling, and you just want to commiserate with other parents or get advice or support from other people who are engaged in the same project as you, that's why I set this up. Otherwise, it's sort of hard to find each other. You might encounter a few people here, a few people there, but I want to create a place where we can congregate, share ideas, screen share. This is happening in my kid's school. Do you guys have anything like this? What did you do? What worked? What didn't work? And so on. And hopefully we can just help each other out. That's why I did it. So, out of breath now. Thank you guys so much for watching. And thank you for subscribing to the channel and sharing this out with other people. And I really appreciate you very much. So have a great night. I will be back next week. Don't have a topic yet, but you'll be the first to know. Please do follow me on Substack. I am creating more content there. thereasonwelearn.substack.com. And I guess I will see you guys next time. Take it easy.